That's a $120,000 grab. Guy's freaking out, someone stole my car, calls the police up, the police. And they come out and they write a report, and you know, the guy calls a friend, someone takes him to work. Well, you know, that's his baby, that's a lot of money. And he can't focus on work, so about 2 o'clock in the afternoon he comes, this is a true story, 2 o'clock in the afternoon he comes home, and there's his Beamer in the driveway. And on the windshield, under the wiper, is a little envelope, and in the envelope is a note that says, sorry about the inconvenience, I was driving by last night, my wife was pregnant, broke her water, my car quit. I'm a mechanic, I didn't hurt your car. To make it up, I detailed it, got 2 twilight doubleheader tickets to the Detroit Tigers. I hope this makes it okay. No name, no identification. I says, wow, I got my Beamer back. Goes inside, tells Mama, they get dressed up, they go out, they have dinner, they wine, dine. They go to the game, the Tigers win both games. They get home about 1:30 in the morning. They didn't come for the car. Oh my God. They needed to get them out of the crib so they could get the real expensive stuff. Now, I'm not endorsing robbery. Don't hear me wrong, okay? But according to the principle, if the action produces a desired consequence, it's a good action. Well, that's why I said there's an upside and there's a downside. You know, lying, stealing, cheating, raping, robbing. Not every action is considered to be socially acceptable. It violates certain rules of social conduct. That's my stuff. Don't put your hand in my pants. I mean my stuff, you know, this stuff. Don't put your hand in it. That's my stuff. You might end up not taking your hand back. Okay? But the principle is working correctly. But the application of the principle shows us there's a failure in the action, not the principle. And we'll talk about this as we get into the course. That was backwards. There's a principle that comes out of this that's called utilitarianism, the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It's a principle we use all the time. Minimum wage is up for grabs right now in the political arena. If they raise the minimum wage, most people will be happy. Some people will have to pay more out of their total earnings, the owners of businesses and whatnot, but most people will be happy. It's a utilitarian principle. And most people say, well, yeah, we ought to raise minimum wage. After all, we're all working for a living. The guy at the top's getting his wealth because we're working for the man or the woman, okay? And then there's another principle we'll learn that Aristotle gives us called moral virtue, or what he will call meritocracy. You deserve what you earn. You worked hard for it, don't you merit the reward for it? You work hard at a business, there's a job opening, a promotion. If you worked hardest, shouldn't you get it? Why should it be the nephew's cousin or whatever? That's another principle that we work with. When we apply ethics, we do see that there are downsides. We have to deal with that when it happens, and that's why our laws are in place to help us regulate social behavior. Nevertheless, teleology, purpose-driven living, is how we all live. We just have to modify the principle to fit our rules of social engagement. Questions? Okay. Okay. Questions about that? In the early 1800s, a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. By the way, it's Kant. If it was Kant, it would be a C. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, takes a look at Aristotelian ethics and he says, you got it all wrong. He says, what's important isn't the consequence, it's the action. If it's the right thing to do, you should do it all the time regardless of the consequences. That's why we get no lying, no stealing, no cheating, no raping, no robbing. It's just wrong to do those things, even if it produces a consequence that you think is profitable to you. He respects the fact that Aristotle is Greek, and he calls this theory deontology. Ology, again, the study of. Deontos, which literally means duty. For Kant, then, it's your duty to do the right thing all the time, regardless of the consequences. So for Kant, we come up with moral duty. And this is what first responders use all the time. You have a moral duty as a medical personnel to act in certain ways in certain situations. If you're an EMS or EMT and you come across an accident and there are people who are injured, you are morally and legally required to deal with the most injured, even if it was the drunk who ran into the car head-on with family and people in it and injured them severely as well. It's your moral obligation. I was sitting on an airplane coming back from Portland, Oregon, had a guy who was an EMT, he was down here, born down here, did it here, went up to Georgia. He said, boy, that ticks me off. He says, I'm not about to get sent to jail for doing the wrong thing or losing my job. It's your moral obligation. Firemen run into burning buildings. Police and military run into harm's way. They accept that as part of their code of ethics. They have a moral duty regardless of the consequences. Now there's a downside to that. You don't ask a fireman to run into a building that's completely consumed in flames and there's no way he can save that child on the 3rd floor. There's no hope there. But he knows it's his moral duty. That's why he dresses in gear. That's why he practices running into burning buildings. But there are limitations to that theory, just like there are limitations to consequentialism. You follow that as well? So it's a good standard, but most of us aren't deontological. You may come across a situation in your life where you may have to be or decide you want to be deontological. There was a story back, I think it was in the 70s. It's an airplane that took off. I think they call it Ronald Reagan Airport. That was Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. Plane took off, didn't get a mile and a half out, and crashed into the Potomac River. There's a bridge that goes over the river. There's a fellow in a car, and he watched this whole thing happen. This is wintertime. Plane goes into the river. By the way, planes are designed to break apart in 3 pieces. The tail comes off. It's the safest place to be. No one wants to be there. You're at the back of the cargo cache. The front end breaks off. That's the worst place to be. That's where the pilots are. And the middle is horrible because the gas is the fuel. The jet fuel is underneath it. That's where the explosions and the fire uses. Okay. This fella is on the bridge and he sees this happening. People get thrown out of the airplane. It's the middle of winter, sub-zero weather, and people are going into hypothermia within minutes. He's the first one there. He's literally on the bridge and he watches this plane go down. What's he to do? Well, he sees these people and he knows they're going to freeze to death. He gets out of his car and jumps into the river and he starts saving people the best he can. Goes through maybe 4 or 5 and then he starts going into hypothermia. About that time, first responders get there. So they go in, they start doing the same thing he did. They pull him out so he doesn't go into hypothermia. And there's a reporter there and she sees this thing happening. She goes up to him after it's all done. She says, what were you thinking? I mean, you could have died. And he says, yeah, but I was the first one there. If I didn't go in and save these people, nobody would have. They'd have died too. He assumed it was his moral duty. Now, first responders, it was their moral duty. I think it was 3 years ago, a bridge in Minneapolis collapses. There's springtime. By the way, wind is the most powerful force on the planet. It moves water, and water coming down from mountains is just rushing. This bridge collapses. There's cars on the bridge. They fall down in. Concrete is falling over. And when you see the video of it, there's a lady dressed in a green uniform is tying herself to one of these concrete embankments that still have these abutments, and she's tethered, and she goes out, and I mean, this water's just moving. This water's moving concrete. She's tethered to it, and she goes underwater periodically, comes back up. She's looking for people who are still alive in cars. If the windows are rolled up, you've got a pocket of air. All first responders understand that. And after it's all over and enough first responders come and they kind of get the situation manageable, once again they have a reporter and says, what were you thinking? She says, that's my job. I signed on for this. That's why firemen go into burning buildings. That's why military and police face danger. It's their job. They're deontologists by nature. Once in a while you may find yourself in a situation where you have an opportunity to be deontological in behavior. And let me say this to you too, character is built in the little things of life and it's only tested in the greater things, and if it hasn't been built, you will not pass the test. It's not a moral judgment. It's not easy to put your life in danger. I'm going to share something with you, and then I'm going to share 2 fantasies with you, and then I'll open it for dialogue and we'll be done. 1980, I'm married, living in northern Michigan. Northern Michigan has 2 seasons. They have winter and they have the 4th of July. It's an ugly place to live in. We happen to have one of the supposedly 10 prettiest lakes in the world. It's called Walloon Lake. It's got, I think, a 4-mile arm and another arm. This is State Road 131. And this is Wallem Lake, it's a little town over here, little beach here. We decided to go to the beach with the family. I have two, not 4 children yet, I only have 2 children. Go to the beach, take out our blanket, there's other people at the beach, we get all settled in. And there at the water's edge is a little towhead, little blonde-haired people we call towheads when they're little. I was white here, and then I turned yellow, and then I turned brown, and then I turned Cairo to you. Anyway. So this kid's standing there at the beach, and he's crying. And he's crying because his beach ball got away from him, got out of the lake. Now, that's kind of a picture of lower Michigan. It's a peninsula. And then here's the upper peninsula. And wind is interesting. Wind is like water. Wind tries to find the path of least resistance. So in northern Michigan, we have trees everywhere. And so when wind runs into trees, it tends to slow down. So now some wind can't change direction, but it will be, so a lot of wind in northern Michigan will compress itself. And we get these winds, sometimes up to 70 miles an hour. There's a bridge here called Mackinac Bridge. I've been on the bridge when they shut it down. There was a car up there from Yugoslavia back when they made these little Egos called a Yugo. Literally flew off the bridge. It was the first fatality on the bridge. Okay? So there's a fair amount of wind that day. But see, there's trees here. And so the wind is being hampered. And this ball gets away from this kid and it's going down the lake. Now, I grew up in the hood in New York, okay? And never learned how to swim. You didn't have to. The ocean's right next to New York, so you go out in the ocean. The ocean's got salt in it. You can't drown in salt water unless you drink too much of it. You just go out there. So we never learned to swim. We'd go to the beach, and you go out about 30 yards, and the waves would come in, and you turn your body into a human surfboard, and we used to surf. We did that all our lives, okay? So I never learned how to swim in fresh water. This is fresh water. And there's a story behind that. When I was 16, my dad was working for Pan American as a flight engineer. It's a world airline. They don't exist anymore. They went out of business. Yeah, but we never learned how to swim. I didn't have to. So at 16, he used to come down to Miami. He used to go down to Miami, and he would teach the flight engineers, so he finally took us down for a 2-week vacation. And of course, we go to a motel, and we get all packed up in the motel, and then we went out of the motel. Well, what do motels have? Pools. And what do they put in pools? Water. And Larry sees water, and so I just jumped right in, the deep end. And about the 3rd time, the lifeguard saw me doing this. He realized I wasn't waving hi to my mom. I was waving bye to my mom. And so he jumps in, rescues me, literally rescues me. I almost drowned that day. And I don't look it now, but I've been athletic all my life. Went to school on scholarships, basketball, went on tennis scholarship, all this. So teaches me how to swim in 5 minutes. Now you can just splash the water, you can be buoyant, or you can learn how to swim. You ever watch race car driving? They get up close to one another because the car in front is breaking wind. So you have a little less resistance. They call that drag, and you spend it a little less. Well, when you swim right, if you see the Olympics, you watch this at the Olympics this summer, at the 50-meter dash, they always have a camera right at the wall. They go out and come back, and they'll all say this. They'll say, before they touch, watch the wave. And a wave will come up because when you swim